Father, we pray that you'll give us sober minds as we go into your word, that you would get the glory that you deserve through our time together tonight, and not only through our time together, God, but also through our lives, even whenever we are not gathered here together. Help us understand your word as you would have it be understood. Help us apply it as you would have it be applied. Help us not read ourselves or our worldviews into the text, God, but help us submit to your word, God. And allow it to shape not only our minds, but also our hearts and our actions and even our desires. We love you, God, and we praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, 2 Kings chapter 6. It follows 2 Kings chapter 5, which followed chapter 4, which followed chapter 3, and chapter 2, and chapter 1. 2 Kings followed 1 Kings, so on and so forth, all the way back to Genesis. Right? Yeah, that is how it works. We're not going to break down all the context going way back to Genesis, but I will say, long story short, we are in a time period, basically, Genesis 1 through 11 kind of gives us an introduction to who God is, right? Genesis 12, all the way through the end of the Old Testament, is really primarily focusing on how God revealed himself through the people of Israel. And I guess that's even true into the New Testament too. But really, Genesis 12 through the end of the Old Testament is focused on the people of Israel, their rise, their fall, their rise again, their fall again, all that different stuff. And we are in a pretty dramatic time period for them, where we would call this time period the time period of the divided monarchy, or the divided kingdom, where basically Israel, because of different reasons, they've split into the southern region is known by the name Judah, right? And that's named after the largest tribe in that area. And then the northern region, which is the 10 remaining tribes, they go by the name Israel because they are the larger of the two groups. And basically 2 Kings, following off after 1 Kings, has been following both of these people, right? We've been following Judah for a bit, Israel for a bit, Judah for a bit, Israel for a bit. We've been with Israel for a good amount of time, right? So the end of 1 Kings primarily focused on the northern kingdom of Israel, and even to where we're at right now, we're still focusing on the northern kingdom of Israel. And the reason why is ultimately because ultimately both kingdoms are going to be destroyed, but Israel's going to fall first. And so we're focusing on Israel right now because we are basically just seeing them on the verge of collapse, to where eventually the Assyrians are going to come in and just destroy them, right? And then once that happens, then we'll rewind a little bit and we'll go back to Judah and we'll follow them for a little bit. But we are in a time period where we are looking at the northern kingdom of Israel, and we're primarily looking at it through the lens of two prophets that God sent to them. We know that God sent a whole bunch of different prophets to these people, right? Some of them wrote books that we have in the Bible, right? When it comes to the northern kingdom of Israel, people like Hosea and Amos wrote books to them, right? But we're not looking at Hosea and Amos. We are looking at a person named Elijah, and then a person named Elisha, who is Elijah's disciple. Elijah, his story kind of ended in 2 Kings chapter 2, so we've been away from him for a little bit. And we've just kind of been following Elisha around, and Elisha's been doing a bunch of just different really cool stuff. He's been performing a lot of miracles. And one thing that I've been trying to emphasize as we've been going through this text is that, kind of like the miracles of Jesus, these miracles do not occur in isolation. They're not just magic tricks, right? Especially the first thing that we're going to see in this chapter. It might seem like it's just a little magic trick whenever you read it, because you're like, it looks kind of simple, right? It's literally about an axe head floating in water. And you read that, and at first you're like, oh, cool, that's a neat little party trick. But there's actually depth to this, right? And all the miracles that are occurring, they have emotional and spiritual resonance and just legitimate real-world implications, both in that ancient culture and to us to this day. And really the running trend that we've seen over the last few chapters is that Elisha is a character who steps into a world of death and produces a world of life, right? So basically he keeps coming into situations where death is imminent, and he is metaphorically giving birth to a resurrection, right? He is basically resurrecting a dead society and giving birth to basically a revived society that is more faithful to God. Ultimately, we know that Israel is not going to be totally revived, and they are going to ultimately be destroyed and sent off into exile. But what we see Elisha doing during this time period is he's basically doing what Jesus did, right? Jesus is going to face very similar circumstances whenever you get to the Gospels. Right? Jesus is going to be ministering to a Jewish people who have hardened their hearts against God. They don't realize it, though. And ultimately, the Jewish people, like the people during Elisha's time, they are going to be destroyed. Right? The Assyrians are going to destroy Israel. The Romans are going to destroy Israel during the time of Jesus. But whenever Jesus showed up, he was almost creating a metaphorical Israel in exile. Right? He was taking this corrupt Israel, and he was creating like a remnant community within the land. Right? And that gives birth to the church. Right? That's kind of what Elisha's doing. He's almost creating his proto-church. And he's going to different places, and he is producing life in the midst of death. And the last chapter that we saw, we actually got to see the far-reaching implications of this, because we actually got to see a Gentile army commander come into the land of Israel and convert to worship the God of Israel, to such a degree that by the time he left, he literally took a bunch of dirt from Israel back with him, so that whenever he worshipped God in his homeland, he could worship him on God's turf, which is actually kind of cool. And so that's where we were at there. Does anybody remember that guy's name? Starts with an N. Naaman, right? So Naaman the leper, right? That's what we talked about in 2 Kings chapter 5. Today we're in 2 Kings chapter 6. There's going to be a few different stories here. And there's some really cool stuff. And so we're just going to hop right in. Sound good? Anything y'all want to add? I kind of talked for a little bit there. Anything y'all think that we need to know in regards to Elisha and his ministry and stuff like that?
Should we mention anything about Gehazi? Or is that not
yeah, you can mention him. Yeah.
There is a time to give and a time to receive.
Yes.
Now is not the time to receive.
Yeah. What were you saying about Gehazi?
Oh, I didn't have anything in particular to say. I just wasn't sure if that was significant to bring up, but to bring him up, I suppose. We first saw him in chapter, was it 4? I'm not sure what chapter it was.
I don't remember.
4 or 5?
Yeah, something like that.
It must have been 4, because I don't think it was 3. But he came up. That was when that one woman that had the room for Elisha, she came to him for help because her son died. And Gehazi was the one who went ahead of them to use his staff to heal the child, but nothing happened. And that was kind of a foreshadowing of his character.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that chapter actually revealed his character too much.
Yeah.
But last chapter was when we saw his true character whenever Elisha let Naaman go and didn't take anything from him or request anything. But Gehazi went ahead and went behind Elisha's back and caught up to Naaman and asked him for stuff. Deceptively lied to him, said that Elisha requested it for these two men. Gave it to the men, went back to his house, took it back from them and kept it for himself. And as Elisha pointed out, he was actually, it was just not the right time to ask for things, because it could have gone very badly. Could have been bad for reputation for God.
Yeah.
And not to develop too much more time on it, but there's one important thing I want to bring up. And if you bring up the old Levitical laws and the laws of Moses, a leper is considered unclean. So by him and his descendants becoming lepers, that means, according to the old laws of Moses, they cannot enter the presence of God again.
Yeah. And one thing I want to highlight just in regards to that is we got to realize that these are, first off, historical accounts that did actually happen. But as with any book of history, a historian is selective in what they can share, right? And so the authors, like the author of 1st and 2nd Kings, they didn't simply write this story because it's the only story they knew. They wrote it because they thought there's a reason why we needed to know these stories, right? Like we know that there's a bunch of different people who are mentioned in this story whose names aren't even, we don't even know their names, right? The Shunammite woman, she's simply called the Shunammite woman, right? Apparently we didn't need to know her name, right? So any of this stuff is selective. And so what we saw, especially in that last chapter, you see this contrast between Naaman, the Gentile, and Gehazi, the Israelite, right? And we get to see a little bit of what God is doing in Israel at this time period, because you actually have Gentiles who are responding more properly to Yahweh than the actual people of Israel, right? Naaman, he comes from a foreign land into the land of Israel. He has his leprosy cleansed by God, and he leaves a convert. And he commits to basically staying devoted to Yahweh even in foreign territory, right? He worships the God of Israel from a distant land. That's pretty cool. By contrast, you have Gehazi living in the midst of Israel, and he is just seeking his own selfish benefit, his own selfish gain, and as a result, he receives the very disease that Naaman was delivered from. Right? And so you literally have this reversal, which kind of calls back to Deuteronomy, where God says, if Israel rejects me, I'm going to go to the Gentiles. Right? And so while the story did historically happen, the author is highlighting a shift of what God is doing in Israel's history at this time. Right? He's using this as like a case study to paint a broader picture. Right? And we get to see that God is doing something different here. Right? The story in isolation is pretty cool, but I don't want us to simply know the story in isolation. Right? I want us to understand what part it has in the grand scheme of the book. Right? And that's hopefully what we're going to accomplish in 2 Kings 6 as well. Right? We never want to simply just know the content of the passage. We want to know how it all fits together. Right? We want it to be like a tapestry. Right? Where we understand the individual threads, but we also want to see the big picture. Make sense? All right, cool. Let's jump into 2 Kings chapter 6. I believe there are 33 verses in this chapter. So, all right, we'll just take it one slide at a time.
And the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "Behold now, the place before you where we are living is too limited for us. Please let us go to the Jordan, and each of us take from there a beam, and let us make a place there for ourselves where we may live." So he said, "Go." Then one said, "Please be willing to go with your servants." And he answered, "I shall go." So he went with them, and they came to the Jordan and cut down trees. Now it happened that as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water. And he cried out and said, "Alas, my master, for it was borrowed." Then the man of God said, "Where did it fall?" And when he showed him the place, he cut off a stick and threw it in there, and made the iron float. And he said, "Take it up for yourself." So he sent forth his hand and took it.
All right, cool. The floating axe head.
Interesting.
This is one of those stories where people read it, and it just right off the bat sounds kind of weird, right? Like it sounds like a magic trick, right? To where it just sounds like, of all the other stories, it seems like there's a much more practical benefit to the things that happen here. Like you can understand why, like you can see God's mercy in a prophet of God showing up and like providing oil for a woman and her son when they're near the point of death. This, at first you don't fully see the mercy, right? At first you just see it and you're like, oh, okay, that's cool. And so personally, I've seen a lot of people make fun of this story. They're like, whatever, okay. But I think there's actually more to it than just that. And so we all summarize what exactly happens here.
So basically, his followers say, "Hey, can we go build a place to meet and worship? Because this place is too small." And they go, "Yeah." And Elijah says, "Yeah, go ahead." So they go down to the river, and he goes with them, and they start building this place. And then one of them was basically cutting up wood, and his axe goes to the water, and he's freaking out because it was borrowed, and he's not able to pull it out of the water and return it. And then Elijah makes the axe head float, and he gets it back.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what that happens.
Yeah, so construction project gone wrong, axe head falls off, lands in river, dude starts freaking out, Elijah's like, "Don't worry, dude, I got you." Axe head floats, problem solved. Let's walk through it and see if we can get a little bit more depth out of it than just a neat little story there. All right. And the sons of the prophet said to Elisha, "Behold now, the place before you where we are living is too limited for us." All right. What do we see here?
I think this could mean that the company of Elijah and his prophets have grown.
Yes. Okay. So what does that imply? Like, how are we supposed to be feeling about this?
This is a good thing. That means the Christian faith in the community is growing.
Yeah, this is good news, right? In the midst of 2 Kings is a pretty depressing book. This verse right here, there are worse problems to have, right? Especially whenever you consider the end of 1 Kings. Remember whenever poor Elijah, he was literally he was so distraught that he literally fled Israel, went down to Mount Sinai, and cried out to God and said, "God, I am alone. I am the only one serving you." And we know that he wasn't entirely alone. But the idea is that that's how he felt, right? It felt like he was the only one trying to serve God, right? And now, if you think about it, only a few chapters have passed. For us, it's been several months because we read a different book in between and stuff like that. But if you're just reading through this, like if you were to literally just open up 1st and 2nd Kings and read it through in like one sitting, I mean, you would have been reading Elijah's problem, like an hour earlier, right? And you get to this, and it's a radical reversal, right? Elijah was the solitary prophet in the wilderness, right? Kind of like John the Baptist. Elisha, he's more like Jesus, right? Feeding the 5,000, right? Where he's like, there's this community that he has formed, and he's not alone, right? And in fact, the community's going so well that like, they're like, we need more room, right? Caves ain't going to cut it for us anymore. If you remember back in Elijah's day, the true prophets of Yahweh were having to hide in caves. Remember there was this guy named Obadiah who went and hid them in caves, right? So they, like the true prophets were living in caves, but caves ain't working anymore. They're like, we need to start building chapels. We need to start building like cathedrals, right? They're like, we need to think bigger, which is kind of cool, right? I mean, even though the culture itself, like the kingdom is falling apart, but the remnant community, the remnant Israel, the Israel in exile, they're actually growing, right? And so that to us should be encouraging, right? Behold now, the place before you where we are living is too limited for us. So right off the bat, we're like, oh, okay. So that adds some weight to this construction project, right? If you're going back to, or I don't know how to put this. We'll just go back. Okay, let's go back to the imagery of Joshua leading the Israelites into the Promised Land, right? Because we've talked about Joshua a little bit as we've been talking about Elisha, and a lot of times the best way to understand these stories in the Old Testament is kind of see how like the stories that are being told are reflecting older stories, right? And we've talked about how Elisha, in many ways, he is the new Joshua, leading the people into a new conquest, into a new promised land, and he's basically helping them be planted in the area, right? And we see that they are prospering in the land, right? That's what we see here. Or you can even read this as David looking down at the tabernacle of God, right? And he says, God has given me a house. Should not God himself dwell in a house? Right? That's almost what the prophets are saying here. They're like, hey, like we're doing so well that this little house ain't fitting us anymore. Can we go and build something bigger? Right? So you should feel that same triumphant like energy at this comment as you feel when Joshua and them are watching Jericho fall, or whenever David has it in his heart to build a house for God, right? It's kind of like that same vibe, I guess you could say. Right? That's how you're supposed to feel here. And so they say this, please let us go to the Jordan, and each of us take from there a beam, and let us make a place there for ourselves where we may live. All right? What do they request?
They basically want to go to the Jordan and build a larger place to live and worship.
Yeah.
That's all they want to do.
So, all right, when we think of the Jordan River, obviously, usually as Christians, we think of John the Baptist, but we're not there yet, right? What have we associated with the Jordan River so far, recently?
Elijah ascending to heaven. So he took his robe or his cloak, smacked the water of the Jordan, it split. He crossed over, and we talked about this whole thing back in Exodus, where I don't know if it was in Exodus, but basically the Israelites crossed over to the Promised Land.
In Joshua. Yeah.
Joshua, yeah, my bad.
Very good.
Got it mixed up there. So they crossed over to Joshua, in the Promised Land in the book of Joshua.
Yeah.
And it kind of signifies like a departure from the land and then like re-entering.
Yeah.
Kind of like I don't think I did the best job explaining it, but
no, you're spot on though, right? The Jordan River, we talked about this I think last week, that the Jordan River is really small. It's like a tiny little brook. We think of it as like a just glorified ditch almost. But it is a boundary marker in the land of Israel, right? It is their eastern boundary marker. And so the Jordan River, it is the place that Joshua led the Israelites through whenever they're entering the Promised Land for the first time. It is the place where more recently Elijah exited through the Jordan River into the wilderness, and there he ascended into heaven. And then, in the last chapter, Naaman the leper, he went to the Jordan River and he bathed in it 7 times, and that is where he was cleansed. And so the Jordan River, just in the text of Scripture so far, has become a close association with the presence and the cleansing power of God. Right? That's kind of what we're supposed to be associating it with. Right? The Jordan River is how you enter into the promise of God. If you're exiting, in some way that's associated with judgment. Right? So Elijah, him exiting, and whenever he ascended to heaven, he did not ascend from the land of Israel. He exited the land of Israel and ascended from outside. And that was a judgment and an indictment on the people of Israel. Right? Because they had rejected their prophet, so God took him away outside of the land. Right? And so Naaman, you have this Gentile, and he is metaphorically being baptized in the waters of the Jordan River and coming out clean. Right? No wonder John the Baptist shows up later on, and it's like, hey, this is where I'm going to baptize people, because you have this rich history behind this river being associated with entering into the presence of God and escaping judgment, stuff like that. And so these guys, they say, let us go to the Jordan, and from the rivers, they're wanting to gather the material to build this house. Right? It makes sense that they would pick there. Right? Because you've got this association with it basically being the way that you were ushered into or out of the promised land. Right? All right, well, let's go there and let's gather the materials. And so Elisha tells them what? Go. Right? You got my permission, go and do it. Then one said, please be willing to go with your servants. And he answered, I shall go. Why do you think they asked that?
Maybe for help, assistance.
They wanted to remain in the presence of Yahweh while they were.
Yeah, so this is another thing that we've talked about, and that's why I'm kind of asking some of these questions. I'm trying to remind us what we've kind of talked about. Elisha, in many ways, over these past few chapters, he's been characterized almost as like a living temple. Or almost, not really a living temple, he's almost a living Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
Right? To where he goes, the presence of God goes. Because you got to remember, where is the temple at?
It's in Jerusalem.
It's in Jerusalem, which is in the kingdom of Judah. And so Israel does not have a temple, right? And that might make sense why we've been following the prophets around, because there is no temple. The only temples they have are pagan shrines dedicated to pagan gods. And so Elisha is the metaphorical Ark of the Covenant that carries the presence of God everywhere he goes. And so as these people go about this building project, well, the reason they're wanting to go about this is because they want to build a place for God, right? They're not building a temple, but they are the sons of the prophets, right? They want to serve God. And so they want to make sure that God is behind them. This kind of, once again, goes back to David wanting to build a temple, right? Do you remember how that whole interaction went? He said, hey, Nathan, he was talking to the prophet Nathan, I want to build a temple for God. And what did Nathan tell him?
You'll get the plans ready?
Yeah, he said, go and do it. But then what did God tell Nathan?
David wasn't going to become one.
Yeah, God was like, hey, Nathan, slow your horse there, buddy. I actually don't want David to build me the temple. He said, that's a good desire, but it's not his job. Right? And so it turns out that even though Nathan, the prophet, had told him to go do it, God himself was not behind it. Right? And so there had to be a little bit of a change of plans there. And so Solomon went and built the temple. So it's almost like the sons of the prophets here, they don't simply want permission to go and do it. They want to make sure that God is with them in it, right? And they're saying, hey, you can tell us to go do this, but will you go with us, right? Like, if you are with us, that is like God himself giving his seal of approval behind us going about this reconstruction effort.
It might be, I don't know, let's say reading into it too much per se, but it also kind of makes me think of with Moses in Exodus, is it 32 or 33? When God says, y'all can go in the promised land, but I'm not going. And then Moses says,
33.
Wherever you go, we're going.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if that's how Elisha is saying it here, because at first he says go, and then it's almost like he's waiting for a response. Then one of them speaks up and says, will you come with us? And he's like, oh, I'll go.
Yeah. I think that's a fair comparison for sure. Please be willing to go with your servants. And he said, I shall go. So he went with them, and they came to the Jordan and cut down trees. I don't really know if there's anything to break down in regards to that. It's a pretty straightforward verse, unless y'all have any mind-blowing applications about well, you see, as you cut down the tree, the act of gravity falling down. And that's probably what Jordan Peterson would go into. But yeah, so they go there and they start chopping down the trees. Now it happened that as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water. Ironically, this is something that, the way that axes are made nowadays, we prevent stuff like this from happening. But you got to realize that technology back then was not nearly as fancy as nowadays, and usually like stuff would just be like kind of thrown together as best you could. It's not like they had like super fancy ironsmiths and stuff who could like make like the best, strongest axe heads. No, like the average everyday person, you had like some sort of stick with some sort of metal piece attached to it, and hopefully it was on there pretty snug.
Were they living in the Bronze Age or the Iron Age?
Bronze. This is Bronze Age, I
Yeah,
believe.
it's Bronze Age. No,
This I think this is
after the Bronze
This is
Age.
like early Iron Age.
Yeah, because
Between.
the shift between Bronze and Iron Age happens around I think 1 Samuel, like Judges into 1 Samuel.
But
That's where that shift happens.
With tools, right?
Was that? Yeah.
They're tools.
Yeah. And so the guy is trying to chop down a tree, and then the axe head just like flies off, right? It just plops into the water. And most of us would think that this is not that big of a deal, right? But this guy does not have that response, right? It fell into the water, and he cried out and said, "Alas, my master, for it was borrowed." Okay, so it seems like this guy is being very dramatic at first glance, right? I'm going to highlight in a second how this is not actually as dramatic as it might at first seem. But, so what does his main concern seem to be?
That
it wasn't his.
Yeah. He's like,
The value cost so much money.
it's like, this wasn't even my axe head, right?
Probably tools and equipment like that were more valuable back in that day.
Yeah.
And these
Like,
guys
not
were
everyone-
described as being Elisha's servants.
So they're probably not the wealthiest people in the world.
Yeah, so, I mean, there is all that aspect to it, because...
It'd be like making your neighbor's mower. You wouldn't want to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've probably all been in situations like that, right? Where, like, somebody, like, lent you something, and then, like, you broke it, and you're like, oh, this is awkward. Like, you would rather it be your own possession that you broke.
Yeah.
But whenever somebody entrusts it to you and you break it, that's alright enough. But the issue here is actually much deeper, and in order to understand it, you have to actually go back to the law, right? Exodus chapter 22, keep in mind, God begins to deliver the law, Exodus chapter 20, right? That's 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 22, we read this, starting verse 14. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor, and it is injured or dies while its owner is not with it, he shall make full restitution. But if its owner is with it, he shall not make restitution. If it is hired, it came for its hire. So there's this principle in the law that says if you borrow something from somebody else, and this could be a living thing or an inanimate object, if that thing is broken, injured, if it dies, it is your job to make full payment for what you lost, right? And if you cannot make full payment, what the Torah goes on to explain in other verses, I don't think it's in that same verse. No, it's not. But basically, if you could not pay up,
You basically become an indentured servant.
exactly, you would basically become a debt slave, an indentured servant to that person. And so, more likely, what's going on here is that this guy realizes he will not be able to, like, make up for this. And so, it's not simply, oh no, I lost this person's axe head. He's realizing, my life might be on the line for this. Like, I borrowed this axe from this person, and maybe there seems to be an expectation that, like, the person he borrowed it from is not a very forgiving person. Because that is always an option, right? Somebody could simply choose to forgive the debt. But based on this guy's reaction, it seems safe to assume he does not expect the debt to be forgiven, right? And it seems like since he is a son of the prophet and ministry does not typically come with a lot of money, he doesn't think that he can pay this guy back, right? So it's not simply, oh man, I broke another person's equipment. It's like, no, this is not good, right? Like, I have lost this person's thing and I might become a slave because of this, right? Like, it's much higher stakes, right? Also, another thing I was going to look up. What is the verse? Just because I don't know if there's an intentional parallel being made here. In the commentary that I always read, they mentioned it. Deuteronomy chapter 19. Okay, let me pull this up. If anything, I just want to quote this because I always find it such a humorous passage. Because whenever you're reading it out of context, I mean, not out of context, whenever you're just reading it as a 21st century American, it just sounds so silly. Alright, this is Deuteronomy chapter 19. Once again, different laws about just different actions that can happen, and basically cities of refuge. Basically, whenever somebody commits a crime that they did not mean to commit, there was basically an opportunity for them to flee to certain appointed cities where they could take refuge until things kind of got figured out. Deuteronomy chapter 19, starting in verse 4. Now this is the case of the manslayer who may flee there and live, when he strikes down his friend without premeditation, not hating him previously. As when a man goes into the forest with his friend to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, and the iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend so that he dies. He may flee to one of these cities and live. Right? So just whenever you read that, it sounds like such a specific scenario, but you got to realize that axe heads flying off were just very common back then. You can go online and just like Google like 10th century BC axe head, and you'll look at it, you're like, okay, yeah, like I see how these things would just like fly off, right? Like just go Google it, and like the image, you'll be like, okay, I see this. But basically, in this story, two guys go out in the woods, like it's a hypothetical scenario. Two guys go out in the woods, they're chopping wood, one guy's axe head flies off, strikes the other dude and kills him. That was not intentional, it was an accident. And according to the law, this person was guaranteed refuge, right? Because obviously, is the person who died, is their family going to be very forgiving of this person? No, right? Yes, we know it was an accident, but they're not going to view it that way. They're going to be like, you insolent, like you need to be more responsible. How could you let this happen, right? People don't typically think straight in situations like this. So the law made provisions for such people to flee to cities of refuge. Lest the avenger of blood pursue the manslayer when his heart is angry and overtake him, because the way is long, and strike down his life, though he was not deserving of death, since he had not hated him previously. Therefore I am commanding you, saying, you shall set apart three cities for yourself. Right? And so what you see in the Torah is that what God's trying to teach the people is, on one hand, you should honor one another's possessions. Right? And so if you just are very careless with people's possessions, well, then you'll have to pay for it, right? And you're going to be held accountable for that. However, it also makes provisions for the fact that the accidents happen. And if that accident happens, God will provide a way out. If you read that into this, you can kind of see what Elisha's doing here, right? Especially whenever we've kind of associated the Jordan River with death giving way to life, and now you have an axe head flying off. Like it's literally almost straight from the Torah. Right, where a person's chopping down wood, and then the axe head flies off, and rather than striking a man and killing him, it flies into the place of death, right, into the river, right, and then Elisha is going to produce life from death, right, and so it's literally Elisha is being the metaphorical city of refuge in this situation. Does that kind of make sense a little bit? All right. So it happened that as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water. He cried out and said, "Alas, my master, for it was borrowed." Then the man of God, and I always like when it says man of God, right? Just then the God man, right? Because it's emphasizing who Elisha is. It doesn't say his name, it says his role, right? He is God metaphorically stepping into the situation. Then the man of God said, "Where did it fall? Point me to the place." And when he showed him the place, he cut off a stick and threw it in there and made the iron float. All right? So what's the deal there?
It's kind of like magic. Like boom.
It seems kind of like it.
Yeah.
It seems kind of weird that he has to throw the stick in there. Why do you think that is?
Well, because the stick would be floating, and like it would just float in the water, and then the axe head would rise up too.
Yeah. But why couldn't he just be like, "Arise, axe head"? Actually, I don't even know if the commentary addresses this. This is just a interesting question that came to my head.
I'm thinking the power of God, just when the stick just hit the water, got it, caused the axe head to just rise and come to the surface so he could get it out.
Yeah, I'm assuming what's going on here is. It's kind of like whenever right before Jesus resurrects Lazarus, how he prays this prayer. And he says, "God, I'm praying this prayer not because I need to, but so that everybody hears me praying it, so that whenever Lazarus steps out, they'll know that you're the one who did it." I imagine that's kind of what's going on here, where
so, the sons of the prophet don't think he's just some magician that it's he's God's the one doing the work.
Yeah, it's like he's making it clear this is an act of God and it's an intentional thing. It's not like the iron, like the axe head would have just like floated on its own. It's almost like an exchange, right? Something that typically floats is being thrown into the water to show that the water is normal water, and then the axe head floats up. It's where, like, I'm assuming that's kind of what's going on there. I don't know. I'm sure that there's some people who have read like a much deeper meaning into it, and maybe they're correct, maybe they're not. I don't know. But at the very least, we know that's what happened, right? He takes the stick, throws it in, or it could almost be like an exchange, right? If you're kind of going with the death to life imagery, you have like the whole thing that brought about this axe head landing in the water is this guy trying to cut down a tree, right? And now a piece of a tree is put into place so that the axe head can be removed. I don't know. It's like an exchange. I don't know. So he showed him the place. He cut off a stick, threw it in there, and made the iron float. And he said, "Take it up for yourself." So he sent forth his hand and took it. I think there also is this beautiful aspect of the fact that he tells the man to grab the iron, like the axe head himself, right? Because hypothetically, I mean, if Elisha, by the power of God, can make an axe head like float to the top of the surface, he could have hypothetically like caused it to continue floating into the hands of the man, right? I mean, at this point, why not? But I think it's like the idea of God is doing what man cannot do, and then God allows man to do what he can do, right? So like
It's kind of like with Jesus and the blind man.
in what way?
Is it the John 9 one? It's the one where he like spits and like tells him to go wash.
Yes.
Where it's like he does one part, but then he has him do a second part.
Yeah. I think it is like that, because I think what it is we see kind of just like the character of God, like how he likes for us to participate with him, right? And so God will do the things that we just can't do, but then he invites us to also partake in it, right? Where this man, he could not make the iron float. Only God could do that. And so Elisha, he did that part. But you know what the man could do? Reach out and grab the axe head from the water once it was there. And then, like, so with the blind guy, this guy, he could not restore his sight, but he could go wash his face, right? The disciples, they could not multiply 5 loaves and 2 fish into enough food to feed 5,000 people, men plus women and children, but they could provide the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and then they could hand out the food, right? And then they could gather it at the end, right? We just kind of see that's the character of God, right? Like, he could just do everything, but that's just not his character, right? His character is one that invites us to, like, participate, and submit, and, like, walk alongside him. All right, so there's the first story, and I would actually say that's the least interesting of all the ones we're going through today, because it's actually going to get more exciting and then more depressing, but in that order. But yeah, let's get on to the more exciting one. All right, go for it.
Now the king of Aram was warring against Israel, and he counseled with his servants, saying, "In such and such a place shall be my camp." And the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, saying, "Beware that you do not pass this place, for the Arameans are coming down there." And the king of Israel sent to the place about which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him, so that he guarded himself there, more than once or twice. Then the heart of the king of Aram was enraged over this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, "Will you not tell me which of us is for the king of Israel?" And one of his servants said, "No, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom." So he said, "Go and see where he is, that I may send and take him." And it was told to him, saying, "Behold, he is in Dothan." So he sent horses and chariots and a heavy military force there, and they came by night and surrounded the city.
All right. Mm-hmm. All right. So what happens here? What's that?
Siege time.
Siege time. Never a fun time.
Always reminds me of Lord of the Rings.
And a siege. Yeah.
Or any time in medieval history ever.
Yeah, it's true. Oh man, ancient warfare is just not great. I mean, I guess warfare in general is not great, but.
So,
All right. So what happens here?
So Aram and Israel are apparently having troubles again, and the king of Aram is setting up a camp because he's ready to invade or ambush wherever this is. And Elisha warns the king of Israel to not go there, and the word gets back of Elisha's warning to the king of Aram, and he's like, there must be a spy. You know, how could he have warned the king of Israel against my plans? And so he's mad at the fact that Elisha was able to be so knowledgeable, and so he wants to capture him, and so sends his army out to siege the city that he's in to try and capture him.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the same thing. Oh, King of Aram's ticked off because Elisha keeps giving the King of Israel pointers on where his men are.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like, I guess there's several things that are interesting about this. One thing is that Elisha, we just see, like, he's just a dude who's, like, in tune with God, right? Like, we've seen this again and again. Like, he just always knows what's going on, and then he's surprised whenever, like, he doesn't. I remember, what was it, 2 chapters ago? I think it was, whenever, like, the Shunammite woman's son had, like, died. And then Elisha's like, she's in distress, but God didn't tell me about this. To where it was like, even Elisha's like, this is weird. Like, he's always that, like, imagine being that in tune with God, to where you just always know what's going on. And that's going to be emphasized even more in a second. Like, that's just what 2 Kings is emphasizing. Like, just Elisha knows God really, really well, which is just really cool. Which is, once again, going to be re-emphasized whenever you view Elisha as, like, a prototype of Jesus. Like, Jesus is the one who knows the will of the Father perfectly. But another thing that just is striking to me is Elisha's relationship with everybody is just weird. Like, because, like, on one hand, everybody seemingly wants to kill Elisha on several occasions. Like, the king of Aram wants to kill him here. In a little bit, the king of Israel is going to want to kill him. But also, at other times, we see that the king of Israel submits to Elisha and calls him father and seems to respect him. And then, in the last chapter, we saw that the leading commander of the Aramean army went to Elisha for help. And so, like, it just seems like Elisha is just like this. I guess, honestly, that's just a picture of what it looks like to be faithful. Is that, like, if you just serve God, people are just going to react to you different ways. You know, sometimes the same people are going to love you and then hate you the next minute. Your job is to be faithful. I don't know what message we're supposed to get out of that. But it seems like Elisha, for his part, is at peace with anybody. Right? Like, he's just like, and we're going to see this in this chapter, like, he'll just serve whoever. Like, he loves his friends, his enemies, anybody. But I just think it's so curious, like, it makes me want to know more about the political dynamics of this time. Because we only know what is told to us. Right? And I don't know, like, it could be that maybe not all of this is in, like, strict chronological order. Or it could be that maybe several years are passing in between this stuff. But to me, it's just so funny just looking at Elisha's relationships with these people. And, like, you just never know, like, whatever somebody's in, like, you're like, okay, is this person going to like Elisha or dislike Elisha? And it's just kind of entertaining to me. Okay, let's walk through it. Now, the king of Aram was warring against Israel, to no one's surprise ever, because this was just seemingly constantly going on. Other than the fact, I guess it is kind of surprising, given last week's chapter, whenever Elisha went out of his way to help the leading commander of the Aramean army. But, you know, it's whatever. So the king of Aram was warring against Israel, and he counseled with his servants, saying, "In such and such a place shall be my camp." To which they replied, "Can you be more specific? Such and such a place isn't perhaps specific." No, he obviously did not say "in such and such a place." Why does it say "in such and such a place"?
I guess the placement of the camp isn't really impactful to the story.
Yeah, and I think the implication of the story is that this is going to be, it's a repeated event, right? Because as we're going to see, it says more than once or twice at the very end of verse 10. So it's just letting us know that this happened several times, right? He'd be like, all right, in Gezer is my camp going to be. All right, in Ashkelon is my camp going to be. In Bethlehem, like, this happens several times. And so that's why it says in such and such a place, right? In general, he would confide with his servants, this is where we're going to camp at. Which makes sense, because, like, you know, You got to tell somebody where you're going to camp, or else nobody's going to camp there. The king is just passing on the information to the people who are going to help him set it up.
I
Yes?
think it's interesting to mention that by servants, this probably means his army commanders, not like actual servants in his castle, because
Yeah.
back in the last chapter, Naaman referred to himself as his king's master.
Yeah.
Or his king's servant.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is referring specifically to people just who are under him, most likely commanders of the army. So he counseled with his servants, saying, in such and such a place shall be my camp. And the man of God. Also, one thing I want to highlight here is I'm pretty sure this is true throughout the entire chapter. Elisha is the only person who receives a name, right? Even though technically, if we look at previous chapters, we do know the king of Israel's name, the king of Aram's name, and stuff like that. But in this chapter, Elisha is the only one who is actually called by name several times, to where it's almost like what the person in the commentary kind of talked about is like it's almost like this whole story takes on the feeling of like a parable. Even though it is a historical account, they're just being referred to by like their positions because we're supposed to be looking at the grand scheme of what's going on here. All right, so the man of God, which is Elisha, he sent word to the king of Israel, saying, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Arameans are coming down there. All right, so what message does Elisha pass on?
Do not to go somewhere because the Arameans are gonna
Attack them, basically.
attack them.
Yeah, you might want to stay away from this area because that's where they're going to be camped at.
Yep.
And if you go down there, you're going to get hurt. Right off the bat, what does that imply that Elisha does not desire to happen?
War. Death. Bloodshed.
Yeah, war, death, bloodshed. He doesn't want the king of Israel to be harmed, which is pretty merciful if you think about it. Because first off, did God appoint this king?
No.
No, right? This is the from the Omride dynasty, right? Which is Ahab was the son of Omri, and then this is Ahab's second son on the throne.
Yes, Joram.
Yeah. So these guys, these are like corrupt people. Like you would think that God would want them judged, right? And there are times when God does literally appoint people to go and kill these kings. But in this instance, that's not what's happening, right? In this instance, you actually have God being merciful, and He is revealing to the king his plan, like information that the king himself would not otherwise have. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think Elisha does this? What do you think is being communicated through this?
So is he giving any more inside information?
He is giving inside information. I guess I'm trying to ask, like, why would the author feel the need to share this story? What is this communicating to the reader? What is this communicating about Elisha, about the king, about God's nature in general?
He isn't like fighting.
Well, he still wants to protect the people of Israel.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah, he still cares for Israel, even though the king is corrupt. God is still merciful, right? That's what I'm trying to highlight. Like that, even though we know that the king deserves to die, we just see first off that God is merciful and that God knows all things, right? The king of Israel is incapable of saving himself, much less his people. God, he can just speak to a random prophet and reveal this stuff, right? That's kind of cool. Were you going to say something, George?
I was going to think that the point is that the authoritative office is worthy of respect, and that the role of the prophet is to pass along the information from God as needed.
Yeah. Anybody know what the name Elisha means?
Yes.
Elisha. What is El?
God,
God. Sha.
man or woman? Man.
No. It's really, it's a little bit more than Sha. It's where we get Yeshua from, kind of, or Hosea, like Hosea.
I know you've mentioned it before.
Yeah.
But the linguistic part is not.
Save. It means to save, right? So Elisha means my God saves. Eli is my God, right? Think about Jesus when he's on the cross. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, right? My God saves. Elisha, right? And so Elisha, he is the one producing salvation through all of this, right? The king can't save himself. We're going to see that in this story and in the next story. God is the one who saves, right? And so that's what's being communicated through this, right? The king can't do anything, but the man of God steps in and he's revealing stuff. Like if it weren't for Elisha stepping in here, the king would probably have led his people to destruction time and time again. But instead, Elisha steps in and is going to spare him by just giving him insider information. And the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Arameans are coming down there. And the king of Israel sent to the place about which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him, so that he guarded himself there more than once or twice. All right, so what do we see about, how does the king of Israel respond?
He actually follows Elisha's advice.
Yeah, he listens. And he is seemingly spared, right? It seems like it was good advice. Okay, we'll see in a second. It seems like this was pretty good advice because it seems to imply, I don't know, unless y'all are reading this differently, it seems to imply that the king did have people down in that area, and therefore the king had to go warn them to either get out or just to be prepared. If it wasn't for Elisha, it seems like the Arameans would have just strolled right in and demolished them. And so this is the mercy of God being shown to them. More than once or twice. Then the heart of the king of Aram was enraged over this thing. And he called his servants and said to them, will you not tell me which of us is for the king of Israel? So what's he think?
He thinks
he has
there's
a
a
spy.
spy.
Yeah, he thinks there's a spy.
Sabotage.
Yeah. He's like, all right, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. He says, this has happened way too many times, and that means that one of y'all in here is a mole. Who is it? We got a double agent in our camp. But they don't, right? All these guys are like, it's classic like Jesus saying, one of you will betray me, except there's no Judas in the group. They're all just saying, is it I? Is it I? Is it I? Surely not me, right? So they go around, and they're like, no, it's not us. And one of his servants said, no, my lord, O king. But they do know who it is. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom.
I guess Naaman's been chatting about Elisha to them, so they know.
Yeah.
Or words just gotten around about
Yeah. Well, yeah, the idea is that his reputation precedes him.
Yep.
This is actually a pretty cool comment, too. It's kind of terrifying. But what does he say?
He's like, hey, there's this dude, and he basically knows everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he's like, King, you gotta realize this Elisha guy, he doesn't simply know the secret council meetings that we have. He knows the things that you mutter to your wife before you go to bed at night. Right? Like he knows the things that you say in your bedroom. There ain't hiding nothing from this guy. So again, to the original readers, this is communicating how God knows everything and how God can provide in any situation. Who was the original audience of 2 Kings? Most likely.
Would it have been the Jews who were in exile?
Yeah, most likely. Just because the way 2 Kings is going to end is with a slight glimmer of hope that they're going to return from exile. And so most likely the original readers were the Jews living in Babylon, or the Jews having recently returned from Babylon. Right? I would lean towards it being the last one. I mean the first one, just because I would think that you would read about the actual return if it had happened. But yeah, so imagine you're living in Babylon, being punished for your sin, but you get to see God being merciful to corrupt Israelites, and you get to see how God knows all things, and how even pagan politicians cannot hide anything from God.
Yeah.
That'd probably be kind of comforting, right? You're reading that, you're like, okay, cool, that's nice to know. No, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. Right? You can't hide nothing from this guy, and he will communicate all of it to the king. Mm-hmm. So the compliment does not go to the king of Israel. The compliment goes to the man of God. Right? It is Elisha, my God saves. He is the one who receives the information, and he passes it on to the king. The king of Israel, in this story, he is not being presented as any more powerful than the king of Aram. Right? These guys are on even playing fields. The difference for the king of Israel is that he's got a prophet in his camp who knows Yahweh. Right? That is the thing that makes all the difference in the world. Because, again, Elisha is the portable temple. So he said, go and see where he is, that I may send and take him. He's like, all right, if this guy knows my stuff, let's capture him.
Oh, kill him.
Yeah, I'm gonna get him out of there, right? Let's if he's the one giving away our information, easy solution, get rid of the guy. And it was told to him, saying, "Behold, he is in Dothan."
Dothan?
All right, yeah, he's in a city called Dothan. I don't know where Dothan is on the map, but I do know a fun fact about this, and I genuinely have no idea what to say about this. I mean, the commentary, it does say something about it, and I guess I can read it to you. I'll have to find it in a second. But honestly, I have no idea what to do with this information because it seems very odd to me. But Dothan is only mentioned 3 times in the Bible, and 2 of them are in 1 verse. So it's only mentioned in 2 verses. One is right here in 2 Kings chapter 6 verse 13, and one is in Genesis 37 verse 17. And just the fact that it's mentioned tells me that the author is trying to make some sort of connection here. Because if not, they would have said, Elisha is in such and such a place. But for some reason, it mentions it, which means that the author is trying to highlight a connection. Genesis 37. Let me start in verse 14. This is the context. Joseph, right? This is Jacob, the patriarch, telling his sons to go check on Joseph, their brother. It's sending Joseph to go check on the sons of Jacob. Then he said to him, "Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem.
What chapter again?
Genesis 37.
Okay.
And a man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" And he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." Then the man said, "They have journeyed from here, for I heard them saying, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And then, if you know the rest of the story, basically Joseph's brothers turn against him, throw him into a pit, and he is sold into slavery.
Bummer.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of to make a connection is that in the subsequent chapters of Genesis, Joseph endures severe persecution, he comes out on top, and he provides for his family in the midst of famine. Elisha is going to kind of endure the same thing, right? Elisha is in Dothan, and over the course of this chapter and the next chapter, there are going to be several attempts on his life, but he will eventually provide for people in the midst of famine. I don't know if that is what the connection is being made here. The fact that Dothan, we're talking about the fact that Dothan, they say that Elisha is in Dothan, and Elisha, the city of Dothan is only mentioned 3 times in the Bible, and the other 2 times are in Genesis 37:17.
Oh,
Apparently it's in
Yeah.
the West Bank.
What's that?
Apparently it's in the West Bank.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. But yeah, so I genuinely have no idea what to do with that information. The commentary, it says Elisha is a new Joseph, attacked by his fellow Israelites as well as Gentiles. He responds by giving bread and water to his persecutors, and in so doing heaps coals of fires on their heads. So maybe Elisha is just supposed to be a Joseph-like figure in the fact that, as we're going to see in this chapter, he loves his enemies really well. I think it could be as simple as that, but they're definitely... The author is trying to draw a connection there because he wouldn't have gone out of the way to mention a very specific, obscure city unless that connection was trying to be made.
He's in such and such place.
Yeah, he would have. Yeah, exactly. So it was told to him, "Behold, he's in Dothan." So he sent horses and chariots and a heavy military force there, and they came by night and surrounded the city. Dang, that's a lot of military people for one guy. And so the city of Dothan is surrounded, and they're all wanting Elisha.
Then the attendant of the man of God arose early and went out, and behold, a military force with horses and chariots was all around the city. And his young man said to him, "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" So he said, "Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Then Elisha prayed and said, "O Yahweh, I pray, open his eyes that he may see." And Yahweh opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And they came down to him, And Elisha prayed to Yahweh and said, "Strike this people with blindness, I pray." So he struck them with blindness, according to the word of Elisha. Then Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Walk after me, and I will walk you over to the man whom you seek." And he walked them over to Samaria.
It's a wild story.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Someone get out of there.
Elisha is probably one of the most chill dudes ever. Like this guy. I've got so much I want to say, but okay, what happens here? Let's just start there.
Okay, so the basically Elisha's attendant comes out after seeing the army that was encamped around the city, and by all, like, from everything I've read and seen, Dothan was not a big city. It was like small, so this force would have been able to overtake it easily.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it was fortified. So he's like, yeah, we're surrounded, we're pretty much screwed. What are we gonna do? And Elisha's like, I got this, don't worry. And so Elisha, being so close to God, probably has already seen the force that's around them, but he's just praying for the attendant to be able to see, so that it comforts him. And then he prays to Yahweh twice, once for his attendant to be able to see that the armies of God are on their side, and then once more so that the Aramean army gets struck with blindness, so he can trick them essentially into besieging Samaria.
Yeah. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I can't help but wonder, like, so often I'm just so intrigued by what's not said in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously we need to focus on what is said. But I'm wondering, like, is this how Elisha just saw everything at all times? Like, is this just what it was like to be a prophet? You know what I mean? Like, to where Elisha's just like, dude, chill. And then the guy's like, how can you be relaxed? There's an army. And he's like, God, help him see. And then he's like, oh, we're fine. Like, this is, we're good. Like, is this just how Elisha saw everything? Because if so, it makes sense why the prophets just like react so well to everything, and it makes sense why the prophets like are so emotional whenever you read like their books.
Yeah.
Like if you realize like this is just the insight they had, right? They just understood, like they were literally seeing things on a different like plane. Like they're literally seeing things like on a totally different level than we are. No wonder like for the prophets, like, just the smallest of sins to them is, like, the biggest evil thing you could do. Because to them, they just understand God so much better than we do.
Why would you be scared of a human army when you can literally see chariots of fire?
Yeah. He's like, guys, we're chilling. We're fine. It's just... Yeah, this is such a crazy story. All right, let's walk through it. Then the attendant of the man of God arose early and went out. So, whenever we think of the attendant of the man of God, we usually think of Gehazi. I'm assuming that's not who this is. Just because last time we saw Gehazi, he was a leper. And so, he's probably not... I mean, it doesn't suggest that Gehazi wasn't, like, actually, a follower of Yahweh or anything like that. But it's safe to say he probably wouldn't be closely associated with Elisha anymore. Unless this is, like, told... like, unless this isn't all strictly chronological or something like that. We don't know. But I'm assuming this is a different attendant. Dude wakes up. And behold, you get to see his surprise there, a military force with horses and chariots was all around the city. And I love that it repeats that because we just read that in the previous verse. Like in verse 14, it ended by saying, and there were all these things all around the city. But the author's like emphasizing, this is crazy. Like, imagine that happened. Like they didn't expect this, right? It's not like Elisha knew, it's not like everybody knew, oh yeah, a military force is going to be coming here from Aram. No, Elisha has apparently been passing on this covert information for a while now. Yeah. The attendant just woke up for his morning run or stretches or something like that. He just walks outside the city, probably go get some water from the well, and he looks, he's like,
No,
Holy crap.
I imagine this kind of like how you would be if like a foreign army was suddenly surrounding a very small Texas town.
Oh, yeah.
Seemingly no reason, and you're just like, why are they here?
I know, like-
bigger cities they could be.
Like if
targeted.
China invaded, like if China invaded Texas, and then we were, like the whole little town of Seabrook was surrounded by.
Well, no, I'm just thinking, like, what if you just, like, walked outside? Like, what if you were leaving my house tonight, and you walk outside, and you just see a tank driving down Kirby? You're like,
Yeah.
and then, like, there's several of them. And then they all just, like, surround Orleans. And you're like,
What's going on?
what is happening? Like, it's almost like he feels like he's in a fever dream, right? The guy just, like, wakes up, he, like, looks outside, he's like,
Huh? Why are they here?
yeah, what's going on? But you know what's especially crazy about this? Is that, like, behind all this context, Elisha has been warning the king about the precise locations of where the Arameans would be at. But Elisha didn't warn anybody about this. And so it's like, wait a second. So you're going to warn the king, but you're not going to warn your attendant that, like, okay, you're protecting the king, but now the Arameans are at our door. What are we going to do? And so that's why this guy's freaking out. Alas, my master, what shall we do? Notice that he responds the same way as the guy whose axe head fell into the river. Alas, my master. Right? Very similar to the disciples crying out to Jesus in the midst of the storm. Are you going to let us die? Right? Master, what do we do? And I will say that this guy's reaction seems to be a little bit more well-warranted than the guy whose axe head fell into the river. The other dude was like, oh no, I lost a person's property. This guy's like, yeah, there's an army outside. Like, there is an army outside, and they're all apparently after you, and I'm your servant. Like, this ain't looking good for us. Yeah, I'm in danger.
I'm like, you're gonna be dead first. I'm not gonna follow too long after.
Yeah. So he said, and this is one of the most quotable verses, for, like anywhere in the Bible. So he said, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And you gotta imagine that the guy heard that, and he's like,
I don't see anybody.
I don't see nobody. Like, is there like, he's like scanning the horizon, he's like looking for like another army to like come like barreling over, like in some dramatic like twist ending in like, you know, some movie whenever all hope seems lost, and he's like waiting for like the Red Sea to part or something like that. He's like, all right, okay, yes.
It reminds me of if you've ever seen the final Star Wars movie with that dark.
Which episode?
Episode 9 was Rise of Skywalker. You know, like all those dark, like final order ships, and then these ships just start appearing and like fighting. They're like, yeah, they're more of us.
Yeah.
It reminds
There
me
with
of
them.
Do Not Fear is repeated throughout the New Testament as like the angels, like they're terrified of how powerful angels are. And the first thing like Jesus or an angel says to people is, do not be afraid, don't fear.
That always is pretty funny to me. Like, people always like they always seem shocked whenever the angels say do not fear. But like imagine imagine you're just like chilling out at your house and then some random dude cloaked in white just like pops up out of nowhere. That'd be terrifying. Like, I don't care if this is like the most beautiful looking glowing person ever. Honestly, that'd probably scare me even more. Right?
You're not gonna be like, oh shoot, it's Saint Michael the Archangel.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be like,
You're just like,
Like in verse 16, is the man of God able to perceive all that power? But like that guy isn't.
yeah.
It's a matter
Well, no,
of
that's the
perception.
thing. That's what's being communicated to you, right? Like, practically speaking, what we're supposed to take from this is that there is so much more going on in the unseen realm that we just don't even understand. Like what we're seeing here, like this is theology that has huge implications. Like this passage right here should inform our worldview probably more than most passages in Scripture, just because it teaches us that everything is not what you see, right? Think about the Gospel of John when it says, "Blessed are those who have believed without seeing." There's so much that like so often we live our lives based off what we see.
Nope.
Biblically speaking, that's not what we do. We live by faith, not by sight. Actually, let me see. There's one place in this commentary where he talks about that exact thing. Because he says that in many ways, modern Christians, we have almost become like deists. Like deism is, the idea of, a God who created all things and set it in motion and then just like he doesn't interact with it. And what he talks about here, I'll just read it to y'all rather than summarizing it and then reading it. Unlike pre-modern Christians, modern Christians are often functional empiricists who instinctively believe that only visible things are real. At best, we are deists. Of course, there is a God up there somewhere, but he is a long way off. We do not think we have to press through a crowd of angels every time we move. We do not think that a small angelic deployment runs ahead of us into danger. We do not think, as the poet Francis Thompson does, that we disturb an angel every time we turn a stone. We do not think, to quote Thompson again, that Jacob's ladder is pitched between heaven and Charing Cross. But the Bible and Christian tradition are united in the insistence that angels are real and active. We are, in short, Elisha's servants. When we face dangers and troubles, we often despair and fear because we are seeing only with the eyes of flesh. Paul says we walk by faith, not by sight, but we frequently do the opposite. If we hope to see fiery chariots that surround us, we need to have our sight cleansed and our sins forgiven. So the main thing he's highlighting is that practically speaking, theoretically speaking, we often say, oh yeah, we live by faith. But whenever you actually look at the day-to-day lives of most Christians, we still live in a very worldly mindset of like, we make most of our decisions based off of things that we see, right? Whereas biblically speaking, we have to realize there are so many things we just don't see, and we can't even begin to understand, like the majority of the things that happen in the world, we can't even begin to fathom it because there's this entire unseen realm of angelic forces also working to accomplish things on God's behalf or against God's behalf, right? And for us, we are simply seeing the physical effects of those things. And so that's why we have to trust in what the Word of God teaches us, because that is the lens through which we're supposed to view the world, right? And we have to make our decisions based off of our faith in what we have been taught in Scripture, not based off of simply what we see, because sometimes what we see is just wrong, right? Think about detectives whenever they're trying to figure out, whenever they're trying to crack a case, right? They'll interview a bunch of witnesses, and they'll understand the fact that most of these witnesses are going to get their testimonies wrong because we don't always see things correctly, and sometimes we see what we want to see, and sometimes we don't see what we don't want to see, right? And so inherently our vision is flawed, and that's why Scripture always places a greater emphasis on hearing rather than seeing, right? We have to place our faith in the valid and trustworthy testimony we've received rather than simply trusting in our own sight, right? Because then we're just worshiping ourselves, right? So I just think that's kind of cool. But back to this. So he said, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. But obviously the guy does not understand this, and so Elisha is going to help him understand. Then Elisha prayed and said, "O Yahweh, I pray, open his eyes that he may see." And God's going to answer in the affirmative. Same thing with, remember back with Elijah, right? Anytime Elijah prayed something, God responded, and every time God told Elijah, God and Elisha, they had a very, symbiotic relationship where, they worked really well together.
Very succinct.
Yes. And Elisha, same way, right? When God tells Elisha to do something, Elisha does it. When Elisha asks God to do something, God does it, right? They just, it's the classic case whenever Jesus says, ask and it will be given to you, right? Seek and you will find. Whenever you are genuinely seeking the will of God, you'll work well together because you're of the same will. Yahweh, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And Yahweh opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw.
It's kind of funny, he can see, but it's being phrased like he's curing blindness.
Exactly. Yes, it is. The idea is that Elisha is the only person who sees in a world filled with blind people.
Well, it's a spiritual blindness. It's
Yes.
not a physical one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but the imagery of that is
Unlike
that
the very physical blindness that Yahweh's about to inflict on the entire army. Of
yeah. Well, I don't even know if it's supposed to be a physical blindness there either. I think it kind of is. We'll get to that in a second. But the idea is that spiritual sight is more important than physical sight. We see the same thing with the Apostle Paul, right? The Apostle Paul, the moment that he is on the road to Damascus, gets struck down, he's struck blind. And the irony of that whole thing is that the moment he is physically struck blind also happens to be the same moment that he has true sight for the first time, right? Whereas whenever he had physical sight, He was totally blinded by his own sins and all that stuff, right? And so he spends the next 3 days blind, but for the first time he's genuinely seeing. So that by the time his sight is restored, he has metaphorically spent 3 days with Jesus in the tomb and resurrected as a totally new person. And that's kind of what's going on here, right? And I love just the drama behind how this is told. Yahweh opened the eyes of the young man and he saw. And like so far we still haven't been told what he's supposed to see, right? The whole idea is that like the drama behind it, like from a literary perspective, is that we're supposed to be wondering, what is it that Elisha sees? Because Elisha, he's not afraid. He just says, do not fear. And then he says, God, make him see. And as a reader, you're like, what is he going to see? And then it says, and behold, he saw. What did he see? Like it's like, you're supposed to be excited. What did he see? And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. What's the last time we heard of horses and chariots of fire?
When Elijah was being brought up to heaven.
When Elijah was being brought up to heaven, right? And so this is the idea of these are the armies of God, right? And it represents the presence of God. And they are protecting who? Elisha, right? That's why Elisha's not concerned, right? Like it's like Jesus sleeping in the middle of a storm. He's not concerned, right? He's like, dude, just go back to bed. God's going to take care of this. And so for the first time, I genuinely want to spend so much time on this just to talk about the implications of this. But consistently when you read Scripture, what it teaches is that there's an entire unseen realm that we just can't even fathom. Like even in this room right now, if we could have genuine sight, I don't even know what we'd see, right? Angels, demons, I'm just like,
Constant war going on.
well, yeah, right? Like we don't know, right? Like we don't know the amount of things that could be going on right now. Where literally it's like angels and demons fighting against one another, battling for our attention, right? Trying to the angels fighting on our behalf, trying to keep us focused, and then like demons trying to fight, trying to keep it trying to get us to break our unity with one another, right? Like stuff that we couldn't even fathom. What's that?
Possess us.
Yeah. Or it could be something where there's not even a war going on, but if you looked around the house, that's because there's an army of angels surrounding us, right? Like, we don't even know, right? Because we can't see like that. Elisha, he could. And for us, the cool thing is that we don't have to see. What we have to do is simply trust that God's going to provide, and that it'll be fine either way, right? Like, it's like, okay, cool. Like the whole point is that fear is irrational, right? Like, if God is for us, who can be against us? That's the message being taught here. And they came down to him. So this is the, I'm trying to figure out, is the they here the armies of God, or is it the armies of the, I'm assuming it's the armies of the Arameans coming down to him, right? And they came down to him, and Elisha prayed to Yahweh and said, strike this people with blindness, I pray. You see the contrast, right? On one hand, he's praying for vision. On one hand, he's praying for blindness. So it's literally the opposites. And God can do both, right? He can give life or he can bring death, right? He can give sight to the blind or he can give blindness to the seeing. Strike this people with blindness, I pray. So he struck them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. And this could be a physical blindness, but I don't think it's a physical blindness in the sense of like them not seeing anything. I think it's the idea, and y'all could correct me if y'all are getting something different out of this. I think it's the idea that they just didn't recognize who Elisha was.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's the idea like they probably still saw, but because I imagine if it was physical blindness, they would have realized, oh, something's wrong.
In the same kind of way, Jesus concealed his blindness right after he rose again. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Like so, whenever Jesus shows up to the disciples on the road to Emmaus, right? They walk and talk with him for a long time, and then at the very end, he reveals his identity. It's almost like God. It's almost like the same sort of spiritual insight, right? To where it's literally like God is. It's almost like to bring up Star Wars. Remember, like just the whole Jedi mind trick. This is not the droids you are looking for, right? It's almost like that is quite literally what Elisha's doing here, right? I am not the man you are looking for, right? Follow me, and I will show you to the man.
I'm going to take you hundreds of miles away.
Yeah. So he struck them in blindness according to the word of Elisha. Then Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Right? You're at the wrong place. You actually you took a wrong turn. Walk after me, and I will walk you over to the man whom you seek." And he walked them over to Samaria. That's interesting. Why does he bring him to Samaria?
Israel, I believe.
Yeah. Capital is.
It is the capital of Israel, but why would he bring him there?
I want to say it's a safe. Well,
It's not
Maybe
safe
because
place
it's
for
a
them.
test
No,
for the king of
yeah.
Israel.
I actually read a little bit ahead, and I know why, but at first it seems kind of strange as to why.
Mm-hmm. What's your answer?
So, after I read a little bit ahead, it seems like he brings them all together to bring peace between the two lands for a temporary period of time. Because the king of Israel go, well, what do you want me to do? Kill them? And he goes, and then Elijah goes, do not kill them. When you kill those who have captured with sword or bow, set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink. So they eat and drink, they have this feast, and then they go back to their master, and there's peace in the land for an unspecified period of time.
Yeah. There is also an irony here, though, right? Because keep in mind, this is where I think Elisha probably has some sort of sense of humor, which of course he did, because everybody does. But okay, who was the king of Aram looking for originally?
Elisha.
No, beginning of the chapter, or not beginning of the chapter, like at the beginning of this story.
Before that, he was looking for a spy.
Okay, but why was he looking for a spy?
He was warring against the king of Israel.
Because he was warring against the king of Israel, and Elisha kept warning the king of Israel, don't go to this place. And so the king of Aram was really looking for the king of Israel because he was trying to destroy him, right? And he was getting mad because Elisha kept helping the king of Israel evade the king of Aram's attention. And so technically this all started with the king of Aram looking for the king of Israel. And so now Elisha shows up and he says, oh, you got the wrong guy. I'll show you where the guy you want is at. And so he takes him to the king's front door, which is so funny. Because keep in mind, like, this is why it's hilarious. Because the whole time, Elisha, like it almost seems like a twisted and weird game. Because Elisha has been actively helping the king of Israel evade the king of Aram. And now that the king of Aram comes up to Elisha's door, Elisha says, you know what? Like, let me just stroll up and now the king of Israel is going to wake up and there's an army surrounding him. And Elisha's the one who led him there. And it's like, wait a second. What? But that's not the message being communicated, right? Like, that's how it's supposed to look. But ultimately what's happening here is that Elisha, by the power of God, is single-handedly taking this entire army captive. And he is creating prisoners, not of the king of Israel, but of Yahweh himself. And he is delivering them to the king of Israel to see how the king of Israel is going to respond, right? And he is going to demonstrate God's hesed through that, right? But just from a purely optical perspective, this is hilarious, right? Because you've got this whole story where it's like, he's helping the king of Israel evade capture, helping the king of Israel evade capture. The moment trouble comes his way, he leads the enemy straight to the king of Israel's door, right? To where it's like, okay, this is kind of funny. Like, it's almost like he's like, I didn't want the king of Israel to be put in harm's danger because of the scheming of the king of Aram. No, I'm going to be the one who leads the enemy. To like, it's almost like Elisha himself looks like the commander who set this whole thing in motion. It's kind of hilarious. This is not the way, this is not the city. Walk after me, and I will walk you over to the man whom you seek. And he walked them over to Samaria. And they just followed him.
If this is the Dothan that is in the West Bank, that is a far distance to walk.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a pretty good distance. All right. And we move on.
Now it happened that when they had come into Samaria, Elisha said, O Yahweh, open the eyes of these men, that they may see. So Yahweh opened their eyes, and they saw. And behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. Then the king of Israel, when he saw them, said to Elisha, My father, shall I strike them down? Shall I strike them down? And he said, You shall not strike them down. Would you strike down those you have taken captive with your sword and with your bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and walk back to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them. And when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away. And they went to their master. And the marauding bands of Arameans did not come again into the land of Israel.
Okay, so two things. I take that back about the unspecified period of time. So if you look in verse 24, it says sometime later, and then that's when the famine and besieged Samaria begins.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I noticed the king of Israel said to Elisha, "My father." So that's also another good sign because it shows that the king has some respect for the man of God.
for the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, so that's what I'm saying. The relationship between Elisha and these guys is so flip-floppity because like they just go back and forth to where this is actually a good moment where he actually is respecting Elisha, probably because Elisha saved his neck several times. So right now he feels pretty he feels pretty endeared to Elisha, probably because he has viewed Elisha as an enemy, yet Elisha has saved him several times, and that's actually a big message of what's going on here, right? When you love your enemies, you heap burning coals upon their heads, and they actually start being nicer to you. So it happened that when they had come into Samaria, Elisha said, "O Yahweh, open the eyes of these men that they may see." I just love that this is like an ongoing thing. It's literally like a light switch. Like Elisha's like, "All right, God, turn the lights on. All right, turn them off. All right, turn them back on again. All right, we're good." Like it's just like Elisha's just over here like, and like they can see. And so he prays. Now that they've gotten to Samaria, God help them see. And I don't like. It could be that they had been physically blind. But I think that if they were literally physically without sight, they would have probably not just been listening to him. I think it's more the idea of confusion, right? They just blindly went with him, right? They thought that this was a guy who was genuinely helping them out, and they're like, okay, cool. And so Yahweh opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. So they're not even necessarily like surrounding the city; they're just like in it. And it's almost like he has literally single-handedly delivered them into the hands of the king. And they're like, oh crud, we just walked into this. And so once again there's this contrast. On one hand, the chapter, earlier on in the chapter, not the beginning of it, but earlier on in the chapter you have the king of Israel who blindly almost walked into the king of Aram's soldiers several times, right? And it was only through Elisha's intervention that the king of Israel was spared. But now you have, through Elisha's intervention, the king of Aram, or like his people, they do blindly walk into the king of Israel's defense, right? So like, it's a reversal, right? It's God providing in the midst of all of this. So like, he's metaphorically given sight to the king of Israel and his armies, and he has blinded the king of Aram and his armies. So Yahweh opened their eyes and saw, and behold, they were in Samaria. Then the king of Israel, when he saw them, said to Elisha, "My father, shall I strike them down? Shall I strike them down?" But why does he repeat it twice?
For the emphasis.
Yeah, emphasis, where he's imploring him. Think I should do this? I think I should do it? Yeah.
It was like he really wants to.
It's revealing that's what he wants to do, right? He's repeating it because it's like, it's kind of like my students today. The weather was really nice, and they came up to me. They're like, "Mr. Tate, can we go outside?" I don't know. "Please, can we go outside? Can we go outside, please, Mr. Tate? Can we go outside?" They're repeating it because it's like that's what they really want to do, right? And they're not wanting to take no for an answer. But he says, "Should I strike him down? Should I do it? Should I just they're here. You brought them before me. You make the call, but should I strike him down?" And this also could tie back to the fact that I think it was Ahab. What was it, Ahab? Where he was supposed to strike down the Arameans, but he didn't do it. That was at the end of 1 Kings, I believe.
With Ben-Hadad?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I'm kind of blanking there, but I'm pretty sure that's what was supposed to happen.
I think that was Ahab because it was that was the last, it was one of the last 3 chapters, right?
Yeah.
And it was all about Ahab?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was Ahab.
Yeah.
Ben-Hadad is still alive.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think Ben-Hadad's more like a title. I think it's because it's like son of Hadad, and Hadad's like one of their gods.
It's kind of like Abimelech.
Yeah, like Abimelech or like Pharaoh or something like that, I think. And so the king of Israel, he wants to kill him, right? Or kill all these people. Should we strike him down? And this is so cool. And Elisha said, "You shall not strike them down." He emphasized that. "You shall not strike them down. Would you strike down those who you have taken captive with your sword and with your bow?" What seems to be implied there?
He's like, would you execute normal prisoners of war?
Yeah. And what does he expect the answer to be?
No.
No. Which, honestly, I think that he is I think he's being gracious there, because a lot of kings would, right? And if we know anything about how corrupt these kings were, they probably would as well. But it seems like Elisha has this like, he's speaking from like the heart of God, and he's like, you wouldn't just kill any prisoner. What's that?
Weren't they instructed to follow different rules of warfare?
Yeah.
So they weren't supposed to kill their prisoners?
Yeah, but like that's what I'm saying. Like, it's like, we know that this king does not really care about the law.
It's like an ancient Geneva Convention.
Yeah, but Elisha is speaking to him as if he did care about the law, right? There are times when God tells them, wipe out an entire people group. But in general, if you don't just kill any prisoners. But more than that, are these the king's prisoners at all? No. Did he do anything to capture them? No. These are prisoners of Yahweh. So these aren't even yours to kill them. Like this. No, these are guests, which is crazy. Like, just, this is where you, like, this is like the heart of the gospel right here. Elisha found enemies who were literally seeking his life. He ushered them in to the king's territory, and now he is commanding the king to give them a meal. Like, this is so great. You shall not strike them down. Would you strike down those who you have taken captive with your sword and with your bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and walk back to their master. No, I don't want you to kill them. I want you to make a feast for them, and then I want you to let them go.
Does that set a precedent?
I think it is. I think it's revealing the heart of God. Because this is not how warfare goes, right? I mean, so far, let's just recap. So far, on several times, these people have sought to kill the king of Israel and the armies of Israel. And the only reason they didn't do it is because Elisha intervened. These people got together a whole military force to go kill Elisha. That's who we're dealing with now. But Elisha got away with it. Got away from it. Most people would be seeking vengeance. Most people would say, you know what? These people are getting on my nerves. They're a thorn in my flesh. Let's wipe them out. Instead, Elisha says, hey, king, I brought these people over here. Yeah, they are your enemies. Yes, they are the people who wanted to kill you. They wanted to kill me too. I was just wondering. Actually, not even wondering. I'm commanding you. Give them food and let them go.
It's like a reminder that God's really the king.
Yes, because here you've got some prophet strolling in and giving instructions to the king. And the king's going to do it. Right? Because ultimately, God is the one in control. Right? I am the captain now. Right? He's like, no, this is what you're going to do. You're not going to kill them. Instead, you're going to kill them with kindness. You're going to be merciful with them.
And then they're going to kill you.
Probably. I mean, no, literally. Watch what happens in the next story. We still got one more story before we wrap up here. And it's going to get dark. And it's going to be from the same people. Right? So it's not like it's just going to dramatically be better overnight. One thing to say here from the commentary. Elisha is surrounded by the hosts of heaven and has no need to fight with the sword. Instead, he fights the Arameans with generosity and overcomes their hostility with abundance of hospitality. A great feast. And this is in many ways what Jesus does for us, right? This is the gospel message. What the enemy means for evil, God works for good. And so we are supposed to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. That's what Jesus told us to do. So he says, no, don't kill them. Make them a feast and let them go. And so the king does it. This is actually a good moment for the king. He listens, which is shocking. So he prepared a great feast for them. And when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away, and they went to their master. Who's their master?
The king of Aram.
The king of Aram. And it seems like it worked, because the marauding bands of Arameans did not come again into the land of Israel. For the time being. But why do you think they didn't come back into the land of Israel?
Because they had just been spared.
Yeah. I mean,
they were expected to be brought there and killed, but they were given food and water and sent home.
yeah.
I was actually wondering this the other day. So, like, back in the day, people would actually go by their word that if I could kill you, but then I don't kill you, then you owe them your life, and then they actually fall through by not, like, they owe you.
Yeah.
Did they actually stick to that?
Sometimes. But what we see here is just the effect of grace. Right? Like, this is how grace affects people. Right? Whenever you receive something that you don't deserve, if you actually, like, own up to your actions and realize what you've just been granted, you can't help but respond with gratitude. Right? I mean, these people, they have been hunting down the Israelites for a while now. We've seen several conflicts with them. And yet, here they were, like honestly, they're super confused. They were in a weak moment right here, right? They had been ushered into enemy territory in the middle of the capital city. The king could have had them killed. But instead he had a feast for them. And he sent them home happy. And as a result, this is what the Bible says. When it says, whenever you entrust vengeance to God, you are heaping burning coals on the person's head. To where they're so overwhelmed by your graciousness and your kindness that they can't help but be gracious and kind back. And so it seems like for a temporary time, the Arameans were like, hey, let's stop invading them. And let's just give them peace. Like, they seem pretty chill. And so we see that through Elisha's intervention, once again, life in the midst of death. Right? This constant warfare suddenly comes to an end. Not through vengeance, and not through the destruction of the enemy, but through kindness and grace and love.
It kind of reminds me of the last chapter with Naaman, just because, I guess what I'm thinking in my head is if they did the opposite, which was Elisha did that, and then either they fed them and made them feel comfortable, then killed them, or just killed them. It's about the message it's sending. Yeah. So maybe Elisha was still thinking now is not the time for the vengeance and all that stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of like the whole Naaman thing, how it makes God look.
Well, yeah, because did Elisha get anything out of this? No, other than a long hike. He didn't get anything out of this, right? But it's not about what you get. It's about the glory that you give God. And he gave glory to God, and he gave grace to these people, and therefore, for a time, there's peace. But the peace is not going to be long-lasting. And so let's get to the end of this chapter. We've got about 10 more verses. Buckle up. Oh, just so you know, it's going to get dark. It's going to get dark. Just buckle up.
Now it happened afterwards that Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered all his military camp and went up and besieged Samaria. Now there was a great famine in Samaria, and behold, they besieged it.
Is this the same king?
We don't know. It might be. Right.
Yeah. Now there was a great famine in Samaria, and behold, they besieged it, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a fourth of a cob of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Save my lord, O king." He said, "If Yahweh does not save you, from where shall I save you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" And the king said to her, "What is the matter with you?" And she said, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, 'Give your son that we may eat him.' But she has hidden her son." Now it happened that when the king heard the words of the woman, he tore his clothes. Now he was passing by on the wall. And the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth beneath on his body. Then he said, "May God do so to me and more also, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat remains on him today."
Dark.
All right.
Dark.
We have reached cannibalism. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Not even just cannibalism, but also familial cannibalism.
What?
Which is you're eating. You're such a random person. You're eating your own children. It was wild. All right. So what happens here?
Do we really have to talk about
The
So there's a massive famine. Food apparently costs a lot of money, so there's probably some inflation going on.
Watch out.
It's not just some.
So a woman cries out to the king, and he basically tells her about the she basically tells the king about the whole cannibalism crisis.
Yeah. Let's just walk through it.
Yeah.
And yeah. Now it happened afterwards that Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered all his military camp and went up and besieged Samaria. Most likely, I imagine that it's probably 6 or 7 years that have passed. Mainly because by the time we get to the next, I think it's chapter 8, it'll tell us that there was like a 7-year famine, and it seems like if it's referring to the same famine, then this is like it seems like we're at the tail end of the famine here. In which case, it's probably like 7 or 8 years. In which case, this could be the same king. It could be a different king. I'm not totally sure. But main thing is that that peace from the last story didn't fully last, right? It was a kindness that it produced peace for a little bit, but ultimately politicians are going to do what politicians are going to do. There's going to be strife, and it's time to fight again. Or not even fight, lay siege.
He saw the opportunity with the famine.
It seems like that's really what this is, right? It seems like he's taking advantage of a bad situation, right? So he sees that the people of Israel are enduring a famine, and he says, all right, let's get them while they're weak. Which is really ironic, given the fact that what you literally just had Elisha providing food for them, right? And so on one hand, like the contrast there, like we shouldn't miss that, right? Elisha provides food for them, and then in the story immediately afterwards, they show up and they are attacking them at a time period when they have no food, right? And so the judgment's going to be pretty harsh on Aram, right?
Yeah.
So it happened afterwards that Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered all his military camp, and they went up and besieged Samaria. And so, keep in mind, we haven't seen this yet, right? Last time they were in Samaria, in the previous verses, they just went into the midst of the camp. They weren't even besieging it. Now they're besieging it. This is going to foreshadow what the Assyrians are going to do in a few chapters. Because the Assyrians are going to show up and besiege the city, and eventually the city's going to fall. This is not going to end that way. But the Arameans, they come, they're besieging the city. Now there was a great famine in Samaria. Right off the bat, what does that tell you?
No food.
Yes, and what does that tell you? Spiritually.
Yeah.
Babysitting.
They're not following after God, right? Whenever you get like to these portions of scripture, like whenever it says there's a famine, there's a drought, there's warfare going on, and they're losing battles, that should always tell you that they're sinning against God.
Because you got to keep in mind we're still kind of following the Levitical laws, right?
Well, yeah, we 100%
when basically in long story short, Levitical laws, it's like if Yahweh says, "If you follow me, I will be good to you, and I will cast out your enemies before you. But if you don't follow me, there's going to be droughts, there's going to be famines, and you will run and flee even though nothing's chasing you."
Yeah, Deuteronomy 28, verse 38, "You shall bring out much seed to the field, but you will gather in little, for the locust will consume it. You shall plant and cultivate vineyards, but you will neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worm will devour them. You shall have olive trees throughout your territory, but you will not anoint yourself with oil, for your olives will drop off." Right? So God says, like, if you're just, like, Deuteronomy 28 is, like, the go-to passage if you want to know, like, if you understand Deuteronomy 28, you'll understand the rest of the Old Testament, because it literally says, if you obey the law and you listen to God, this is how it's going to go well for you. And there's, like, 10 verses. And then it's like, and if you disobey God, here's 60 verses on all the bad things he's going to do.
Also, if you read,
It's Leviticus like 26 and
it's Leviticus 26:14 all the way down to Leviticus 46 is like punishments for disobedience.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go through it all right now, but
Yeah.
you get the idea.
Yeah, and so whenever you say there's a famine, you got to know the people of Israel are sinning against God, right? And so in many ways, this is also judgment against them.
which, I mean, it makes sense because they had just, and it seems like the people of Israel are always turning to God in times of crisis.
Yeah.
But whenever there's peace, like there was shortly following the Arameans stopping their marauding, then they turn away from God.
Which we tend to do as well.
Yes.
Usually, whenever our life is going down the poop chute, we cry out to God. And whenever things are going great, we get distracted by our prosperity.
Yes.
So there's a great famine in Samaria, and behold, they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver and a fourth of a cab of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. Anybody ever woken up and said, you want to eat a donkey head? Or dove's dung?
No.
Do you think back in ancient Israel these were finer dining choices? No. The whole point is that this is not what anybody's craving, right? And keep in mind, I don't know exactly what the inflation rate is like for ancient Israel. Like I know that at Jesus' time, right, whenever Judas betrays Jesus for 30 shekels, I know that correlates to roughly $500 of our current money, right? I don't know exactly what the exchange rate was for about 1,000 years earlier or something like that, or I guess 800 years earlier, but 80 shekels of silver for a donkey's head, if it's the same as Jesus' time, we're talking like northwards of $1,000.
I imagine there's somewhere in Leviticus where it describes the price
Yeah.
for a donkey, but
Yeah,
I'm
but
not remembering it this time.
long story short, that's a lot of money.
Yes.
I'll
For
pay you
that.
$500 for that candy bar. I'm so hungry.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? We're like, so if 30 shekels is $500, 5 shekels is what,
It's
a
probably
sixth of
like
that.
closer to $2,000.
No, well, like I'm sorry, like 5 shekels for like dove's dung. It's like $90. I will give you $90 for a little bit of bird poop.
That's gross.
This is how severe the famine is.
Yeah.
It makes sense why an enemy nation would take advantage of this and lay siege, right? Because Israel's already in a tough place, and the whole point of a siege is to starve people out, right? It's the easiest way to conduct warfare. All you got to do is bring a lot of camps and provisions. You just sit around the city, and they can't do anything. And so you just wait, and if they try to fight, okay, well, fight back a little bit, and then just wait them out, right? And then they'll starve themselves to death. And so this is the perfect opportunity to take advantage of this. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, so keep in mind, he's already got a whole lot on his mind. He's literally walking on the wall of the city looking out at this army. A woman cried out to him saying, "Save, my lord, O king." So what is she asking for? What's she asking for? She says save. This is not a trick question. Salvation. She's asking for salvation. Right? What does she mean by that, though?
Save our lives from something.
She means it as literally we're in a battle. I want to be safe from destruction. But typically when we read the Bible, we're thinking spiritual
Yeah.
salvation.
Well, especially considering his response, I assume provision.
Yeah. She's looking for provision, right? But there's irony to this, because once again, what does Elisha's name mean?
Man.
My God
Saves.
saves, right? So she says, "Save, my Lord, O king." She goes to the king seeking salvation. He says, "If Yahweh does not save you, from where shall I save you?" He himself admits, "I cannot save you." He's forgetting that there is literally somebody in his camp whose name is "My God saves," right? And there is somebody who can save them from the situation. But he's despairing, right? He's simply looking at the problems and realizing, I have no solution. From the threshing floor or from the wine press? Right? Where do you want me to save you? Right? You want me to go down to the threshing floor? You want me to go to the wine press? I can't give you anything. Right? We're dry. We have nothing. I might be the king, but I'm limited in my options here. I can't, you can tell this guy's stressed, right? He's freaking out. He's literally got an enemy nation surrounding his capital city. He realizes, the kingdom's on the verge of collapse. And, if they capture them, the kingdom's gone. And he's going down in history as the worst king of Israel. So this dude is, probably breaking out in acne, just freaking out right now. If Yahweh does not save you, from where shall I save you? From the threshing floor or from the wine press? He says, don't bring your problems to me, take them to God. He's the only one who can save you, which is ironically correct. And the king said to her, "What is the matter with you?"
What is your problem?
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah. I think that the implication here is that he can tell that she has something specific on her mind. He's not just saying, why? What's wrong?
the matter?
Yeah, what's the matter with you, woman? Can't you be content with dove's poop? No, that's not what's being said here. He can tell that she has something specific she's asking, right? She wants salvation in a particular way. She came to him with a specific request. I've got a problem. I need you to solve it. He says, what's the matter with you? Which, honestly, I respect the fact that he's willing. He probably doesn't have anything better to do. I was going to say I respect the fact that he's willing to hear her out, but he's stuck in the city. It's probably a welcome
He's
distraction.
probably hungry too.
Yeah. And she said, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, 'Give your son, that we may eat him,' but she has hidden her son."
No.
Probably
It's
random.
like the
But
main problem.
maybe just because
she
the
doesn't
two women.
have-
engaged
I think
in
you're
it.
heading where I'm wanting you to
Oh.
head. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
go there.
I was gonna say it makes you think of the Solomon
Yes.
story with the two women and the kid.
Yes, you have two women, two children, one woman hid a child. And what was the whole point of that story?
Wisdom, discernment.
Wisdom. So this goes back to 1 Kings chapter 3. Right? Is it chapter 3, I think? Where Solomon just got wisdom. Right? And you get this story which is supposed to be just a single picture of Solomon's great wisdom. And I think this story right here shows us why the author chose that story. Because I think he's highlighting the parallel. You got the story where you have these two prostitutes who were they both had children, and one of them, her baby, they both slept with the babies in their bed, and one of them accidentally rolled over and crushed their baby in the sleep. And then in the middle of the night, she went and stole the other lady's baby and traded them out, right? And so they come before Solomon and say, "Hey, she stole my baby." And the whole point of that story is that Solomon is being presented with a seemingly impossible situation, yet using the wisdom given to him by God, he navigates it in such a way as to provide a clear solution that actually produces the truth. By contrast, you have this situation, which is so much more deplorable. So at least in the first situation, there was a clear good guy, right? It was the woman whose child had been stolen. In this one, there ain't no good guys, right? Both of them have engaged in willful cannibalism. And notice, she isn't even arguing...
Yeah, she's not mad that her son got eaten. She's mad that the other lady hid her son.
Yeah, no, she's not even... she's simply arguing... she's not asking... Hold on, let me see how the guy in the commentary words it, because he worded it really well. He highlighted exactly what the problem is here.
She's begging for justice while she just ate her own kid.
Yeah. She does not present the case against her murderous friend, but instead asks the king to approve yet another murder of yet another child. So she's not saying, "Hey king, I've got a problem. This lady ate my kid." No, that's not her issue. She's saying, "King, I have a problem. We both ate my kid, and now she's not letting me eat hers too." So that is clearly, if you're comparing and contrasting this with 1 Kings chapter 3, this is a worse scenario. But there's also a clearer solution to this, right? Stop eating children, right? It doesn't take much wisdom to navigate this, yet the king is not going to have that wisdom, right? So we see how fallen the kings of Israel have become, right? You have Solomon at the beginning, who is navigating a complex situation with the utmost wisdom. And then you got this king over here, who says, "This is too much for me, let's kill the prophet." Right? It's like, whoa! And so there's supposed to be that contrast, right? So I'm glad that you highlighted that. But this is a crazy scenario, right? So she says, "Here's my problem. This woman said to me, 'Give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' We made a deal, right? Times are tough. We didn't have money for dove poop. We had children." So what I will say, I'm assuming just to hopefully, just to try to make these women as humane as possible, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that the children had already died. Because it doesn't say that they killed them. It simply says that they ate them. Maybe the children had already starved to death. I don't know. It could be that they killed them as well. The Bible does not tell us. I'm going to try to assume that just so that it restores my faith in humanity a little bit. But at the very least, it does. We know that they ate them, right? We made a deal. We eat my son today, we eat your son tomorrow. I'm assuming these are infants, because I would assume a bigger person would last a lot longer than 2 days. And so, eat my son today, eat your son tomorrow. That was the deal. I held my end of the deal. I am digesting my body, my son's body right now. Super dark, right? This is dark, depraved, terrible stuff. So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, "Give your son that we may eat him," but she has hidden her son. And so, if the baby is alive, you can understand why the mom would want to hide her son, to preserve its life. If the baby is dead, well, then the woman is only hiding the son because she wants more for herself, right? Either way, it's bad. On this hand, it makes me want to think that I wish that the baby was alive, so that maybe you could at least say that the woman was being humane. But at the very least, it's stop eating kids. right? She has hidden her son. One thing I want to highlight real quick. Going back to Deuteronomy 28. This is what we read whenever God is talking about what's going to happen whenever they cease following the law, right? Verse 52. And your neighboring nations shall besiege you in all your gates until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout your land. And it shall besiege you in all your gates throughout your land which Yahweh your God has given you. Then you shall eat the offspring of your own body, the flesh of your sons and of your daughters whom Yahweh your God has given you, during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you. The man who is refined and very delicate among you shall be hostile toward his brother and toward his wife he cherishes and toward the rest of his children who remain, so that he will not give even one of them any of the flesh of his children which he will eat, since he has nothing else remaining, during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you at all your gates. The refined and delicate woman among you, who would not venture to set the sole of her foot on the ground for delicateness and refinement, shall be hostile toward the husband she cherishes and toward her son and daughter, and toward her afterbirth, which issues from her between her legs, and toward her children whom she bears. For she will eat them secretly for lack of anything else, during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you in your gates. So in the law, this is what Moses predicted. He said, if you disobey God, it's going to get so bad, and you're going to become so depraved, that even the best men and the best women amongst you will resort to things like this. They'll be cannibals. And there are 3 times in Israel's history where we know this happened. One is right here, right? Actually, maybe 4. I don't know. One is right here. The second one is during the siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. And then the third one, according to Josephus, is whenever the Romans laid siege to Jerusalem as well in AD 70. If there's a fourth one, it would be whenever the Assyrians laid siege to Samaria again. But I don't recall. We'll see that when we get there. But yeah, so this did happen. And this isn't the only place where this happens, right? Many cultures would succumb to this, which is pretty jacked up. But that's what we have, right? And so she comes to him with what I would say is a pretty clear solution. Just stop eating children. Now it happened that when the king heard the words of the woman, he tore his clothes. Now he was passing by on the wall, and the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth beneath on his body. So what do we see about the king here?
He's not happy.
Okay, yeah.
He is extremely distressed by this peopleness.
Yeah. He's like, I can't deal with these people. You know that you failed as a king whenever one of your citizens comes up to you and just blatantly, outright, out in the open, admits to eating their child. You know that you failed to uphold good and moral standards. Usually cannibals don't go bragging about it. Usually if they're cannibals, they kind of just do. What's that? Unless they're Hannibal Lecter, yeah. But no, in general, cannibals, that's not a thing you go boast about. Yet this woman literally walks up to who is supposed to be the most powerful man in the nation, and she says, hey, so I ate my kid, and she won't let me eat her kid. That's when you know you failed as a king, right? Whenever literally one of your citizens walks up to you and isn't even concerned about the cannibalism, she's just concerned that she didn't eat enough people. And so he's just in distress. He's tearing his clothes, he's grieving, and people see him, right? He's not hiding this, right? Typically that's also not a good sign for a king, right? Usually kings, if you're going to grieve, do it in private. Usually royalty is supposed to look polished, and they're supposed to look like they're in control. This guy, he's just stressed. He's not handling it well.
He's
right?
wearing sackcloth beneath his clothes, which kind of goes to show how bad the situation has become.
Yeah, he's in a public state of mourning, which isn't going to boost morale, right? And then he comes up with what he thinks is the solution. Then he said, may God do so to me, and more also, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat remains on him today. So who does he blame?
Yeah, why does he blame
Elisha.
Like what?
Well, like father, like son. Remember? Whenever the last famine hit, who did Ahab blame? Elijah. Remember? He said Elijah is the troublemaker of Israel. Right? He's the troubler of Israel. They always blame the prophet. This is what people will do a lot of times, right? Whenever their own wickedness leads them into depraved situations, they'll blame the religious people. oh, if it wasn't for those fundamentalist religious people, they're, our society would be something good. It's like, all right, yeah, it's not totally because you're the one eating children and stuff. That could be part of it. But it's an easy scapegoat, right? Let's blame Elisha, right? The guy who literally was saving y'all just in the previous story. All right, final 2 verses.
Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. And the king sent a man from his presence. But before the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, "Do you see how this son of a murderer has sent to take away my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold the door shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him?" While he was still speaking with them, behold, the messenger came down to him, and he said, "Behold, this evil is from Yahweh. Why should I wait for Yahweh any longer?"
We're going to end on a cliffhanger because I hate to break it to you. I don't know why the heck they ended chapter 6 where they did.
Yeah,
Because
it makes no sense.
yeah, chapter 7 just continues the same story. It's such a weird ending, but we're going to stop there. But let's break it down real quick. Once again, we see how untroubled Elisha is by all of this, right? So Elisha was sitting in his house, right? And the elders were sitting with him. So the elders of the people are all gathered there. They're apparently in Samaria. And they're just like chatting it up. They seem to be doing just fine. And the king sent a man from his presence. But before the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, "Do you see how this son of a murderer has sent to take away my head?" So, hold up. What's kind of cool about this?
He is calling the king the son of a murderer. basically.
Yes. Yeah, and so the son of a murderer, who would be the murderer then?
The former king.
Which is who?
Ahab.
Ahab. Very good. And Ahab, he was a murderer for sure. But what I want to highlight is that Elisha, once again, is just in the know.
Like the whole, do you see, but it hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, right? And the king sent a man from his presence, but before the messenger came, Elisha says, "Guys, do y'all know what's about to happen? In a few seconds, dude's about to come in here, and he's going to be asking for my head on a platter. What's up with that?" Like, Elisha just knows things, right? He's just in the know. He doesn't need messengers to tell him this information. He's just aware. Also, I think it's funny. Do you see how this son of a murderer has sent to take away my head? They're wanting to get his head chopped off. And then that's what it said in the last verse as well, right? If his head remains on him today. But we already know that Elisha's head has already been taken away. Do y'all remember how we talked about that? Who was his head? Elijah. Remember?
Yeah.
Because we talked about how Elijah was the man of hair, right? And then whenever Elisha departed, it was like Elisha's head had gone away. And that's why whenever he's leaving, the kids come calling him Baldy, right? "Where's your hair?" Right? "Oh, well, God took my head away. Sorry." And so Elisha's already lost his head. His head is up in heaven with God. And so he's not in danger, right? You can take away my head, but all right, cool. It's fine. So Elisha was sitting in his house. The elders were sitting with him. The king sent a man from his presence. But before the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, "Do you see how this son of a murderer has sent away to take my head? Look." I just want to emphasize seeing and looking again, right? There's just, once again, Elisha has insight. He's inviting the elders to look. This whole chapter has been filled with seeing and looking and blindness, and I just want to highlight the theme. Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold the door shut against him. That's weird. So he says, "Guys, in a few moments, dude's going to come knocking at the door. I don't want you to let him in. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him?" Okay, so what's the deal there?
King's coming to witness this.
Yeah, the king's coming after him, and it's almost like he's like, I want the king to say this to my face, right? Or whatever's about to happen, he wants the king to at least be present for it, right? And if they let the guy in too quickly, then the king won't get there in time, right? This is Elisha being a master of theatrical stuff. He's just like, I'm going to time this perfectly. So in a few moments, you're going to hear a knock at the door. Don't let the guy in. Just hold the door shut. Get him stuck in the door jamb, right? And then the king will show up, and then I'll give you more instructions. while he was still speaking with them, behold, the messenger came down to him. They're still talking. Oh, knock, knock. There he is. And he said, behold, this evil is from Yahweh. Why should I wait for Yahweh any longer? So this is the messenger speaking. What does he say?
That basically the famine was caused by Yahweh and all the protections.
Yeah. So this is how he justifies getting mad at Elisha.
He's blaming God.
Yeah. He's blaming God for this. But we know, why is God allowing this to happen? Because of the sins of the people. Right? Yeah. Your actions have consequences. My students, like, I have the same issue. Right? They'll get mad at me whenever they get like a conduct mark. And I'm like, I gave you like 30 warnings. Right? And you started mouthing off. What did you want me to do? Right? I mean, like, and they're like, can you not message my parents? I'm like, I could have not if you had obeyed like my first 20 warnings. But now it's like, no, I can't. It's like, in good faith, I cannot, like, I have to punish you. You're simply upset because you're dealing with the consequence of your actions. You can't make me the bad guy here. You're like, I warned you. I was gracious. And at this point, it is just your fault. And that's what's happening here, right? But it's easier to try to absolve yourself of responsibility and blame somebody else. And so, like, rather than taking responsibility for himself being a bad king and leading the people astray, he says, you know what? If Elisha hadn't been so focused on us being righteous people, well, maybe God would have been more merciful, and God wouldn't have done this to us. But instead, God decided to send this famine upon us, and Elisha's God's man, so I'm going to kill Elisha. And I'm tired of waiting for God to fix things. And so, with that note, as the last thing in our heads, we're going to stop. And we're going to have to see how God resolves this solution, or this whole problem, in the next chapter, next week. Do y'all have any final comments y'all want to make before we kind of just close out?
Don't eat kids.
Don't eat children, yeah.
Don't eat children.
Honestly, that is probably the most straightforward application ever. But I'm grateful that somebody said it, because the last thing I would want is for somebody to miss that point. You know, like I would love it if y'all are like out there like loving your enemies and being gracious and kind and you know just living by faith and not by sight. But all of that stuff means very little if you also are eating children. And so let's start without eating children, and then we can begin to apply the rest of it too.
Now, seriously, I was like picturing besieging, and just made me think like in that time, it's a lot of warfare, a lot of violence. It's very common, but like what they did with starvation must have happened like a lot to a lot of different conflicts. Like starvation happened back then, so
yeah.
I don't think there's many descriptions of cannibalism, but
more than you would think.
Right?
But history is pretty messed up. Like people a lot of times in our culture, they're like, "Oh man, our society is falling apart. And it's gotten so depraved." And in many ways, yes, but like
we're not eating kids yet.
Yeah, I mean like
anymore.
Like all you gotta do is just like study ancient that's why we need to study history. It kind of sobers us up. I mean, like, the Persians were literally just, like, impaling people and just, like, just, like, leaving them on the streets so you could just, like, see their bodies there. And then, like, the Romans were lighting people on fire and, like, hanging them up in the alleyways.
200 years ago, we were having public hangings and executions.
Yeah, so, like,
the witch trials.
Like, yeah, like, there are some ways, there are some places where we've gotten worse, but in many ways we're more refined nowadays.
Even just, like, in the 60s, people were still getting lynched all over.
Yeah. Yeah, so...
Yeah, lynching.
Yeah, it's... I mean, once again, I'm not saying that... I'm not, like, saying that to promote our current culture's values. Not at all. I'm just saying, like, we gotta study history then.
And there's a thing where the Bible records history. It doesn't say it's good or bad. It might say slavery or killing or war, but it's not saying those things are good.
Well, the good thing is that sometimes, like, you can just pick up on the fact that it's bad. Like, there's nothing in this that tells us that eating children is bad, but I think that we all... It's safe to say that we can look at this and be like, yeah, shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Or also, honestly, sorry, just last thing, then we can wrap it up. But just to go to the slavery thing, we get a hint of God's attitude towards slavery just at the beginning of this chapter, right? Because the whole thing is like this guy with the whole axe head thing, he could have become a slave, but we see God's provision in like saving him from that, right? Which would like if you're just getting to the heart of the story, it implies that God, that is something that the guy needed to be saved from, right? To where, yes, there's no place in the Bible that explicitly says you're not allowed to have slaves. But there are stories in the Bible which implies that God's ideal scenario is a world free of slavery. You know what I mean? That's kind of just kind of ties in there. That's why I try to get the heart of the message. All right, there's probably more stuff we could say, but it's 9:20 and we should probably wrap it up. Yeah. Whoopsies. All right, what do y'all want to close out in prayer? Thank you, Sean.
Thanks. Father God, thank you for this time that we get to spend together discussing your word. I pray that it would not fall to the ground, but that we would hold it close to our hearts. And as we leave here, that we would continue to reflect on the things we talked about and in meaningful ways. Let us remember the important things and let us carry this out into the world, and let us not be unchanged from our innermost being. Let us continue to grow in our love for one another. Let this group grow, and let us be a part of the solution that this world needs. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.